Good morning, gentlemen. I'm today going to talk to you about the happenings in Russia. Russia, as you know, was earlier the USSR and it was a counterpoise to the Americans in geopolitical power. And in 1971, you will recollect that when President Nixon had ordered the Seventh Fleet into the Bay of Bengal, the Soviet nuclear powered submarines tacked on to the Seventh Fleet and the world was close to a nuclear conflagration. Luckily, the Pakistan army surrendered. They said, hands up, we give up. And so the matter didn't move forward. But, gentlemen, what I'm pointing out to you is that Russia at one time, that is the earlier Soviet Union, was a power to reckon with all over the world. Then came the economic crisis of 1992 when the Soviet Union collapsed like a pack of cards and broke into 17 or 18 states, and the monolith USSR ceased to exist. And I remember, I think Margaret Thatcher, way back in 87 or 88, had made a statement that communism is finished, they have lost. And Reagan echoed it, and the duo of Reagan and Thatcher could celebrate the victory of the Western world. Well, gentlemen, Russia became the successor power to the USSR and was admitted into the United Nations Security Council. It took over all the portfolios which were with the USSR, but Russia was no longer the superpower with global reach. The Russian economy was in doldrums, so bad that at one time Yeltsin even was contemplating joining NATO, but the Americans are very clever. They needed an enemy, a bogey, a Frankenstein to keep the European powers in stress, the smaller ones, create a fear psychosis so that the American hegemony could continue. So at that time in 92, Clinton didn't accept the Russian request to join NATO. And they assured Russia not to worry, we are not going to go into Eastern Europe. But 6 years later, in 1998, Bill Clinton did precisely that, and Russia was surrounded. Russia was not the power it was earlier, so it had to play second fiddle. It could not even defend its allies like Libya's Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein of Iraq because they had no military power. The Americans pulverized them and threw these people out and got them executed. Things began to change slightly once Vladimir Putin became the president of the USSR. Now I'll say about Russia. Russia is a monolith state now. In principle, it's a democracy, but in practice, it is a guided democracy, and all power is vested in the Russian president, that's Vladimir Putin. Putin probably envisages himself, thinks of himself as the successor to Joseph Stalin, but I must sound a word of caution. He doesn't have the same resources as Stalin had, and nor does he have the military power and the military superiority that Stalin had built up in Eastern Europe. Stalin had kept many Eastern European states on leash and had forced them to join the Warsaw Pact. But now Putin doesn't have that leverage. He can't pressurize anybody because Russia is no longer the power it used to be. The Americans have a global reach. 735 bases spread all over the world. That's a fantastic achievement to man so many military bases with troops, weapons, guns, rockets, and their navy with 10 super carriers, some of the weighing over 100,000 tons, policing the world. Despite all this, the fact remains that the Americans lost three significant wars, the last one being in Afghanistan. And the American prestige had touched nadir, the lowest point. So something had to be done, and this they did by getting involved in the Ukraine war. It's an entirely American creation. The Americans removed the pro-Russian president of Ukraine by massive demonstrations, and that man ran away to Russia. And then they brought in a man called Zelensky as the president of Ukraine. Zelensky is a good stooge. You need a stooge in such things, and the Americans got him. The aim was very simple, to provoke Russia. In fact, the idea was that Russia would attack Ukraine, and in the ensuing battle, Russia would be defeated, mainly because of economic hardship which the Americans were going to enforce on Russia. For example, they were going to take Russia out of the SWIFT global financial system. They're going to put lots of restrictions on Russia, and they went one step ahead. They dominated the International Court of Justice and got them to issue an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, stating that he was a war criminal. And now Putin is confined to Russia. He didn't even attend the BRICS meeting in Johannesburg. Obviously, the South African government said, we cannot guarantee that you will not be arrested. That's a very sad state. That South Africa should have bent down so low to the Americans, and yet it wants to be an important factor in the BRICS. It's a country without spine, without spunk, and that is a fact. Now, Putin is very careful. He is not even going to go and attend the G20 meeting in Delhi. So, gentlemen, Russia seems to be hemmed in. The surprise is that despite all the economic sanctions which have been put in by the Americans, Russia has still survived and has fought and continues to fight the Ukraine war. Probably Ukraine would have been defeated a long time back, but its defenses, its weaponry have been bolstered by the Americans, the British, who have given so many missiles, anti-aircraft weapons, drones to Ukraine, with the result that Ukraine now has the temerity even to attack Moscow. So, gentlemen, the point I'm coming to is, what is going to happen now? Russia is on the back foot. That's very clear about it. Because the Russians have not been able to occupy the whole of Ukraine. They have not been able to defeat the Ukrainian army equipped with the Americans and the allied weapons. Gentlemen, now the Russians are crying hoarse that NATO has betrayed them, NATO is attacking them. But I ask one question to Vladimir Putin. Was he not sure that the Americans in any case were going to do it, come what may? If you look at the history, from the time when Russia had applied to join NATO, to the expansion of NATO to the borders of Russia, it was apparent even to a blind man that the Americans are going to ring Russia, and the aim is to break Russia into another 3 or 4 states so that the American hegemony could continue. It's a credit to Vladimir Putin that he has withstood this American sinister plan. But at the same time, let's not fool ourselves. He's facing a great challenge. First of all, there was a threat to his authority from the Wagner Group. And the Wagner Group is a law unto themselves, and they said, we'll march on Moscow. I mean, that's something Putin is not going to tolerate. And so now we have the news that the chief of the Wagner Group has died in an air crash. I'm not saying the Russians did it or Putin ordered it, but the coincidence is terrible. My only surprise is that a man like the chief of the Wagner Group, what the hell was he doing in Russia? He had all the money, he had gone to Belarus, and he should have just left, gone to an uninhabited island in the Pacific or somewhere and had a good time. And he continued staying in Russia, and now he has paid with his life. I'm seeing the video addresses of Vladimir Putin, and he does look harassed. There's no doubt about it, because he's under tension. The Chinese themselves are under tension, under pressure from America to stop all aid of weapons and parts and electronic chips to Russia. So far, they have not done it, but if the American pressure continues, we don't know what will happen. Because China is known to be a nation which, in any case, looks after its own interests. Though they are talking of an unbreakable friendship with Russia, I do not know how much more the Chinese will go to antagonize the Americans and support Russia. Macron, the French president, the German chancellor, and Joe Biden must be very careful, I will tell you. Because there is an old saying that if you catch the bear by the tail, he's going to use his claws on you. And I'm afraid Biden, who's desperately wanting to get election in 2024, may well spell doom for America. Because if he doesn't have a victory to show in Ukraine, he can say goodbye to the White House. As it is, his ratings are very low. And with all the problems that Donald Trump is facing, he may well win. So Biden needs to show some results on Ukraine, and this is why he's thinking all this. And he's even putting pressure on Zelensky to agree for a ceasefire with Russia and hand over some territory to the Russians, because now the Americans do want to get out of Ukraine. They never thought Russia would last that long. And my reading is Russia is not going to give up at all. Why? Because Russia has the world's largest source of natural gas and oil, and they can always sell it anyway, and their economy will not become a debt. Gentlemen, once there's a beginning, there's always an end. And now I think the beginning of the end has commenced. I remember reading about the Battle of Stalingrad, which the Germans lost, when Field Marshal Paulus surrendered to the Russians, and Winston Churchill, the then wartime British Prime Minister, said, "This is the beginning of the end." Now I'm saying whatever is happening in Ukraine now is the beginning of the end. I don't mean the end of the war, I mean it's the end of the American and Western civilization because of the foolishness of the Americans and the British and the French. Macron had once made a statement, "We must not allow Russia to win." I mean, it's a very silly statement. I couldn't understand how a man can go around making some statement when he himself is under great threat in Central Africa, where Niger has declared the French persona non grata, and the French have been expelled from there. French influence is at the lowest, the nadir. Gentlemen, it's a global scenario. The West is also hard pressed. Russians are hard pressed, but they're striking back. And in any case, the pawn, that is Ukraine, is destroyed. I think Zelensky is the war criminal, not Putin. But the West is not going to accept it. Now the question arises, gentlemen, once the Russians reach the end of the teeter and the F-16s also come, what does Putin do? Will he shake hands and say, "Okay, I give up. I'll hand you over all the territory you want, Crimea and all that, let's have peace"? It's not going to happen that way, gentlemen, not at all. And I'm absolutely sure that the world is heading for a nuclear exchange. And we wish you all the best. I hope you will subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and come back for more. Goodbye and God bless.